Welcome back to Emotional Edge, where real stories touch the heart and remind us what loyalty and courage truly mean. Today, we'll step into a town buried in daylight snow, where fear divides neighbours and an old veteran lives alone in a silent tower with only his faithful dog. When disaster strikes and every modern line of communication fails, the same man they mocked becomes their last hope. Stay with us until the end, because this story of bravery, redemption, and quiet love will make you see loyalty in a way you'll never forget. Now, let's continue the story. Thank you for watching this story on Emotional Edge, where every tale reminds us that kindness, courage, and loyalty still matter. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us keep sharing heartfelt stories that bring warmth, hope, and humanity back into our world. From all of us here, and from every loyal dog and quiet hero we honor, thank you for being part of our family. Thank you for being here with us. And now, let's continue our story. By midday, the storm had already swallowed the valley in a brilliant, shifting field of white. But even in daylight, the outline of the Wolfsong Tower held fast on the ridge like a stubborn exclamation mark against a pale sky. And in that concrete spine lived Elias Monroe, 72, tall and spare, with steel-grey stubble, a calm in his pale blue eyes that had unsettled people who mistook quiet for menace. They gave him names: Ghost, Crank, Danger, while he brewed black coffee in a steel mug, logged the barometer's sudden dive, and ran his fingers once more over the smooth, etched labels of his radios as if reading braille from an old life. At his heel lay Scout, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a wolf-grey saddle and amber eyes, head lifted, ears angled toward the window, translating the wind's changing grammar with a soft, low rumble. And Elias answered with habit rather than fear, sealing the south window's gasket, chalking an oil check on the generator clipboard, then stepping to the narrow daylight slit where the town of Maple Ridge lay blurred in blowing powder, its clapboard houses and tin roofs shimmering like frost-bitten miniatures, its people walking specks between pickups and snowdrifts, and in the town hall, he knew without hearing, Mayor Randall Pike would already be shaping a meeting into a verdict. Words like eyesore and hazard and children's safety pulled like flags from a kit. He had seen men build a case around their fear before, and he had also seen storms ignore the confident, so he did not waste time on resentment. He listened to the weather reports that still slipped through the shortwave bands at noon. Drop in pressure, convergence of Arctic air, sustained gusts. And while daylight blazed across the iced pines, he moved room to room with a method that made him feel 20 again. Nails and coffee cans, wrenches hung by size, batteries topped and clipped, 6146W tubes warming in a cardboard cradle near the transmitter, antenna clamps tightened with a gloved hand on the catwalk. When he came back inside, Scout rose and posted at the door like a corporal on duty. "All right," Elias said, not to soothe the dog, but to mark the moment when readiness becomes a kind of prayer. Down in town, Sheriff Daniel Hayes, 40s, broad-shouldered, eyes like a man who'd learned to listen for the thing not said, stood on the station step and stared at the ridge, thinking how daylight can lie, how brightness can hide danger, how the only steady light at noon was the faint rectangle from the tower window that never seemed accusatory to him, only patient. The sheriff's radio hissed and settled. Cell bars winked out, and he told himself to inventory options before fear narrowed his thinking. He had an inventory for people's stories too, and Elias's file had one word that mattered: communications. That wasn't a title, that was a function. Someone who understood that order could be pulled out of noise if you were trained and stubborn and a little lucky. The town's talk about tearing down the tower had been gathering signatures all week. Daylight signatures on crisp paper that looked like certainty. And yet, on a day like this, certainty ran only where men made it with their hands. Elias chopped one final block of ice from the eave with a measured swing and told Scout inside. And when the dog obeyed, he shut the heavy door, laid his palm against the concrete, and listened to it hum with the coming afternoon. A bright, merciless test that would show Maple Ridge what it truly had, and who it truly was. The sun was still high, a dull coin behind a bright white veil, when the power cut with the softest click, the kind of daylight silence that steals in like a polite thief. And across Maple Ridge the familiar chorus died. The refrigerator hums, the forced air sigh, the far-off clatter of plows, replaced by the crisp hiss of snow knives carving across siding and fence slats. Sheriff Hayes checked the main repeater, the backup, and the mobile rig in his cruiser parked hood to hood with the garage door, then the satellite handset for good measure, all in a neat, practiced sequence that ended each time in the same thin refusal, and he said out loud, "Because names make things real, we're blind, not to dramatize, but to set the stake where problem-solving begins." At a small daylight-bright kitchen, with condensation sweating along the window panes, Dr. Nora Bennett pressed her stethoscope to her 9-year-old daughter Mia's chest and heard the high-pitched wheeze of tightened airways, the metronome of a body trying to pick a lock without enough oxygen. And when she reached for the emergency inhaler, the canister that had coughed its last metered dose that morning stared back with indifferent weight. She kept her voice level. "Slow breaths, sweetheart, in through your nose, out like blowing the snow from your mittens," while her own mind ran cold math. Clinic 2 blocks away, road invisible, visibility deceptive in glaring daylight, wind shear gusting. She called the sheriff's office, the line dead, called neighbors, nothing. She told herself daylight means hope. Daylight means someone will come. And then she realized daylight also meant exposure, that her daughter's energy would burn faster in the chill. She wrapped Mia in blankets and set a warm kettle on the wood stove she seldom used, cursing the lost hours when the town had trusted morning brightness more than warnings. Up on Wolf Song, Elias leaned on the bench, forearm near the warm transformer can, eyes sliding from the Collins receiver's S-meter to the logbook, hearing voices hundreds of miles away. Trade storm notes like postcard captions. Ontario clear at noon, Dakota whiteout, Minnesota bands fickle. And he steadied his breath, because calm is contagious, and Scout read him like a room reads sunlight. He moved to the generator room and laid his hand against the olive-drab beast's casing, the thrum translating into bone, then dipped the tank with a wooden rod marked at quarter increments, satisfied with the near-full gloss on the stick. When he returned upstairs, the daylight at the window had turned a strange, flat brightness that war photographers like to call honest. Every drift a contour map of what the wind had believed an hour earlier. Every bare trunk a pencil stroke. He checked the satellite dish alignment through the periscope tube, confirmed the azimuth, shrugged at the nothing in return, and told Scout, "Old-fashioned it is." He tuned the emergency bands that still sometimes carried traffic in broad blue sky days, and even now, in bright stormlight, they were stingy. He wrote a single line on a pad. If they're smart, they'll come, without specifying who they were, because good planning books its options. Down at the station, Hayes studied the ridge and felt daylight's paradox. How it offers visibility but no solutions. How the brightness can tempt you into believing the distance is short. How a town that had scorned a tower in sunshine might learn by afternoon that sunshine is not safety. He zipped his parka and pulled on his goggles, and in that bright garage gloom he decided to gamble professionally, not heroically. If anyone could drag a usable signal through daytime static, in, out, through, it was the man the town had tried to erase. The decision made, action followed, because daylight was burning even if the air burned cold. Chapter 3. The Sheriff's Daylight Gamble. He fueled the biggest plow, a diesel-snouted orange beast that looked at home in glare, and glare alone. Flipped the master, watched the gauges come alive with the same satisfaction he took from a crime scene bag sealed properly, then waved Nora in with 2 brisk motions because calm authority slows panic, and panic wastes oxygen. As the plow growled into daylight so bright it stung, Hayes talked in short, useful sentences. Seatbelt, hand on the dash on the bumps. Tell me every change in her breathing. and Nora nodded, one hand on Mia's shoulder, counting beats and calculating thresholds for when she'd have to risk something bolder. The plough carved a channel through waist-high drifts that gleamed like sugar, the blade throwing sun-whitened fans into the wind where they flattened and blew back as if insulted. And at the base of Wolf Song, the road's first pitch rose under a wind-sculpted cornice that looked deceptively soft until the blade rammed it and stopped with a jolt that rattled teeth. Hayes reversed, rocked, finessed, but physics had a tone of voice too, and it said no. He looked up the ridge, not far by map, forever by drift, and measured the daylight, the wind vectors, his duty, and the cost of pride. Nora glanced at him, and a thing passed between them, the exact band of truth she gives families when outcomes tighten. No fairy tales, only actions. "We can't hoof that with a child," he said. "We die on the way," she answered, already checking Mia's lips and fingers for color. Then both froze at the same sound. A single bark, clipped and purposeful, and in the halo of blown crystals, a shape resolved, low, grey sable, eyes like coins catching sunlight. Scout, chest deep in snow, shouldering the world without complaint. Hayes cracked the door just enough for a sheet of daylit cold to shear his cheek, and Scout pushed his head through, breath puffing, plastic packet thumping against the jamb. Inside it, a note in tight, legible caps. "I see you. Tell me coordinates." Plus medical situation. Monroe. Hayes felt a rush that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with competence recognized at a distance. He scribbled the GPS from the dash, the patient age and symptoms, shoved the note back, and touched Scout's thick ruff once. A brief field salute between professionals. "Go," he said, and the dog went, not theatrically but efficiently, angling along the wind like a sailor who owned the day. He sent his dog through this, Nora whispered, a statement and a verdict all at once. Hayes eased the plough back down the carved channel. The sun a bright coin, the valley a moving field of white glass. And when they slid into the station bay, he was already unbolting the patrol truck's whip antenna to piggyback the stronger mast. In the bright cold of the garage, he thought again of the tower's single square of daylight. How the town had called it an eyesore under summer sun. How men resent what they don't. Understand how sometimes the ugliest thing in daylight is a good idea. No one wanted. He clipped, tightened, powered, pressed. "Transmit, Monroe, this is Sheriff Hayes, Maple Ridge. We have a pediatric respiratory emergency. Daytime, 0 comms. Do you copy?" And the speaker spilled only static, then hiccuped, then steadied into the voice you want in a cockpit when daylight is a liar. "Copy, Sheriff. Go ahead." "Doctor, I need numbers," Elias said, not unkindly, and Nora gave them like beads on a string. Respirations per minute, pulse, retractions, lips color, while Hayes watched the garage door glow with snowlight and felt that strange peace that comes when the right expert arrives and the problem becomes a sequence. Elias repeated the vitals back, wrote them clean, then said, "Sheriff, confirm your best open landing zone in daylight, level, minimal obstacles." And Hayes answered, "High school football field, bleachers on one side, goalposts both ends, snow depth unknown." And Elias replied, "Copy. I'm raising guard air on federal band. Keep your set hot and your people close." The next minute, he was a different voice on a different channel. Daylight steady, even as his generator burned a little faster. "Mayday, Mayday, civilian relay station near Maple Ridge, operating in daylight blizzard conditions. Pediatric respiratory distress, requesting immediate rotary wing evacuation, can provide coordinates and medical oversight." And when the ether coughed and then answered, "Relay, this is Rescue Hawk 12, National Guard. Reading you light but readable. Send coordinates." Elias transmitted with the crisp certainty of a man who had measured twice, then twice again. He did not raise his voice, because competence does not need volume. For the next hour, daylight narrowed to work. He bounced between sheriff and helicopter, between Dr. Bennett and flight medic, choreographing a ballet of small mercies. Clear a lane at the field with whatever you have. Pull the goalpost markers with a tow strap. Mark the wind with high-vis jackets on poles. Keep the kid warm but not sweating. Warm saline if you have it. Count those breaths again, Doctor. He spoke to the pilot about approach vectors and the tendency of daytime whiteouts to blind with brightness right at flare. He asked Hayes for wind from the west stand. Hayes jogged to check and came back huffing in a mask of blown frost. 15 sustained, 25 gusting, daylight glare bad, but clear line from the south. And Elias said, "Take the south. Your flare's cleaner." In the background at the station, more townspeople filed in with that sheepish bravery of daylight court regret, among them Carl Henderson, jaw clenched, eyes unable to meet Hayes's, until the radio compelled attention. And when the first far, rhythmic thump laid itself over the rushing hiss of snow, rotor wash building like a heartbeat, daylight itself seemed to lean forward. "Hawk 12 on final," the pilot said. And Hayes answered with a voice he had borrowed from Elias without knowing it. Calm, measurable, useful. The bright field became a maelstrom as the helicopter slid in, snow blasting horizontally, and Nora and Hayes moved like people who had trained together for years, guiding crew to Mia, handing off the vital sheet Elias had built, answering the medic's questions before he could finish them. In the headset, the pilot said, "Relay, you were the difference." And Elias, watching his meter needles quiver in broad afternoon glow, just said, "Godspeed, Hawk 12, then logged the time because that is what you do when daylight gives you a win. You honor it with ink." When the helicopter lifted, daylight sharpened. Edges, shadows, the brief glitter of ice shards suspended in rotor wake. And the town exhaled a breath it hadn't realized it held. But up on Wolfsong, the bright room had gone suddenly large and hollow, because Scout was not back, and the kind of man who holds a town together by radio can be undone by a single empty doorway. Elias stood in the sun-whitened stairwell and listened to the building settle, then went to the north slit and scanned the ridgeline where day had carved long, honest shadows across drifts. Finally, a speck moved. Wrong rhythm, wrong height. And then he saw the limp, the head low, the kind of line that means a soldier has finished a mission and is paying the price. He took the catwalk in 3 strides, and the day knifed his cheeks as he waded through waist-deep powder that flashed like ground glass. And when he reached Scout, the dog did not perform. He simply leaned his weight against Elias's shin and tried to keep moving, because that is what loyalty does. Elias scooped him like a log and staggered, breathing in measured counts the way he had taught recruits to move a casualty, and inside on the bright concrete, he toweled ice from the fur, palpated the foreleg, sprain, not break, checked pads for cuts, wrapped a compression band loosely, and set a bowl where the sunlight pooled warmest. When Scout's tail thumped once, a small proud drum, Elias laughed the short, choked laugh of a man reprieved. He dialed Hayes on the hour to report the dog home safe, and the sheriff answered with a daylight steadiness that had grown across the afternoon, the kind a town hears and decides to trust. Below, in bright, blowing streets, people began to check on one another with new specificity. Mrs. Ortega's insulin, Walt's kerosene, and Hayes noticed that even Carl Henderson fetched and carried, without the defensive jokes that had been his shield. Daylight reveals, and what it revealed now was a community embarrassed enough to become useful. By late afternoon, the wind eased a notch, and Hayes made the walk he had been building toward all day, a small procession behind him. Nora with her emptied fear, Carl with his heavy apology. 2 council members who had signed forms they suddenly wanted to unsigned. They climbed the carved path, faces raw in the bright air, until the tower door opened and daylight slashed across a man and his dog like a benediction. Hayes started, "Elias, there's no word that covers." But Elias lifted a hand to save him the trouble, because gratitude, like daylight, is best when it lands without fuss. Still, Carl stepped forward, hat in both hands, voice shredded by honesty. "Sir, I was wrong in public, so I'll say it plain in daylight. I was a coward. You're the best of us. I'm sorry." And the apology felt like a plank laid across a gap, something you could walk on. They stood there in the raw glitter of a day that had tried to kill them and failed. And Sheriff Hayes spoke for the town not with a proclamation, but with a plan, because daylight demands specifics. The council would rescind the demolition vote, allocate funds to run a protected permanent fuel line up the ridge, certify Wolfsong Tower as Maple Ridge's emergency communications center, and offer Elias whatever he would accept on his terms: parts, maintenance help, a stipend he could refuse, while leaving his autonomy intact. Elias listened with Scout's chin on his boot, eyes narrowed against the bright snow glare, and he asked two questions any professional would: redundancy on the fuel line and training for deputies on the basics of HF operation. Hayes answered yes and yes, and the councillors, blinking in the sun as if they had been led outdoors from a long, comfortable meeting, nodded earnestly because daylight had made simple what committees complicate. Nora added the only measure that mattered to her. Mia stabilized in the helicopter, oxygen holding, pulse settling, sunlight on her face through the open side door as they banked east. And the news landed in the room like a warm front. Elias glanced at Scout, and then at the town he had held at arm's length for 6 years and said, "We can build something that lasts," which was both an acceptance and a boundary. Down in the valley, the white day softened to a glassy afternoon. Drifts casting blue shadows like watercolor, and men righted toppled mailboxes. Women strung a rope line from the clinic porch to the plowed lane. Kids shoveled steps because kids like to be told they are necessary. Hayes oversaw the installation of temporary markers along the football field. Reflective stakes that would live there year-round now. A daylight investment in the next night they hoped would never come. And he wrote a short, clear memo he would deliver at the next meeting. What worked, what failed, and what no one should ever again call an eyesore. As the sun sank toward the kind of winter horizon that makes even skeptics pause, the tower window shone, not brighter but steadier, a square of ordinary light that meant readiness rather than defiance. In that glow, Scout slept with one ear cocked, and Elias logged the last event of the day in a hand that had not shaken once. 1600 L. Community-initiated ECC plan. Dog recovering. Sheriff competent. Town teachable. Generator at 78%. And then he sat with his coffee gone cool and let daylight finish its long job of telling the truth, which was this: a town is only as strong as the kindness it is willing to learn in public. A man is only as alone as he insists on being. And a dog can carry more than a message when the day asks him to. True loyalty doesn't shout. It shows up in daylight, step by step, until fear has nothing left to say. If Maple Ridge's story touched you, share it so another outpost finds its beacon. And if you've got a Scout in your life, give them a gentle pat for the miles they walk beside you.